Mary Blair's name might not be as recognizable as a lot of the animators, especially the ones that became the 90 Men. To the people who knew about her art at Disney, she's adored and respected enormously.
When I think of my dreams, like as a kid, I see Mary Blair-like colors. Something like Cinderella herself, just this innocence and a purity, a sincerity.
Mary was really pushing the envelope of what animation was.
She was, I think, a very big influence in a lot of those films in the 40s and 50s. It's kind of maybe a little bit of an unsung hero.
Mary Blair, she had a special eye, and this heart of a child comes into the drawings and makes it irresistible. Mary Blair was born in 1911 in Oklahoma, and within a few years her folks and her siblings moved to San Jose area. She had a scholarship to the Chouinard Art Institute in Los Angeles, which was quite prestigious during the 1930s, and she excelled at the school.
And she met Lee Blair, her husband, there.
And they saw themselves as fine artists. And that was the track they were both going to go down. And then I think to make money in the Depression, it was very tough to work as a fine artist, so they had to look for work. And some of the best commercial work around was to work in animation.
Lee got a job at Disney, then everybody started talking about how wonderful Mary was using color, and they were suggesting to Walt that he bring Lee's wife in.
She started working, I believe it was 1941. She did some preliminary sketches for Dumbo and various projects that didn't get off the ground, including a second version of Fantasia back in 1941. But then when Walt was going to South America as part of the Good Neighbor policy and to do research for a series of films that he wanted to make there, he invited the Blairs along.
When she went to South America, I mean, truly that was the full flowering of Mary Blair. All her work from that period on was heavily influenced by all kinds of ethnic cultures. And I think by going there, it just opened her eyes to that, and in a graphic way that she could push her work even more.
She did wonderful sketches while she was there. I believe it was Saludos Amigos, the scenes where you were up at the top of the mountains looking down onto the lake with the boats, and that is just magnificent. And patterned sidewalks. It was just terrific.
You can see in those pieces that transition from the more realistic watercolor to what she later did, which was really stylized and very theatrical.
You can see Mary Blair and her style very clearly in The Little House, which was a short that was made.
Once upon a time, there was a little house on a little hill way out in the country.
She also influenced the color palette of the compilation feature of Ichabod and Mr. Toad. Those scenes in the spooky forest where Ichabod's trying to get home. Those color changes, those are pure Mary Blair.
She really was able to set the emotional mood for key moments in the film. Mark Davis always said that Mary Blair could put colors together like nobody else. You know, she was better than Matisse, he said, and she was just one of those geniuses.
Walt was fascinated by her art, and probably because of the way she was able to create color in a way he'd never seen, and the way that she was able, with a few simple lines, to create a character who had emotion and deep feelings.
Once Walt saw what Mary could really do, he just became her champion. That was both good and bad, because her style didn't quite mesh with the three-dimensional rounded characters that they were used to doing there.
Hi-ho, hi-ho, it's home from work we go.
They were into the kind of intricate illustration from Europe and things. That was what was inspiring Snow White and Pinocchio. And she just went in a whole different direction.
Walt kept trying to put Mary on the screen, despite the resistance of some of the artists.
While the artists who worked at the studio felt a certain resistance to trying to match her style, there was definitely an influence.
And so you find bits of Mary in, a color, a prop, a costume, a setting. But most often the characters are rounded characters, and so they're a little bit incongruous with the background.
Don't you kind of love December when the merry snowbirds chime?
There are a few films in the Disney canon that did use Mary Blair full out, and one of them would be Once Upon a Wintertime.
Once upon a wintertime.
The characters are rather stylized and almost flat.
There's a sequence in Three Caballeros with the train.
Hurry, Dodo, hurry!
It almost looks like her painting's just right there on the screen.
I would say probably the one that best distills the Mary Blair style is Johnny Appleseed. The backgrounds are pure Mary Blair, and they're really, really exquisite. And they capture that sense of whimsy. And by the way, I think whimsy in Walt Disney films did not exist until Mary Blair. Charm, fantasy, those existed in his films, but what she brought was a light touch, and yet a light touch that took you on a journey.
In terms of the influence over a film in its entirety, I feel like Peter Pan and Alice in Wonderland, you get the strongest Mary Blair flavor from those.
The March of the Cards is pure Mary Blair. If you look at the concept sketches, the inspirational sketches she did, and look at that finished film, there it is. I mean, it's color and camera angles and the stylized quality. It's right there on the screen.
There's a drawing that she made of the Mad Hatter's tea table with Alice way down at the end. And somehow, in that image, you can see the whole Mad Hatter's Tea Party. And that's what Mary Blair could do.
To me, it's funny, Cinderella is more the quintessential Mary Blair film. I have to say, particularly if you look at her paintings from that film and then translate it to the actual film, some of them are almost autobiographical.
Mary Blair's concept art for Cinderella was quite wonderful, very successful, and a lot of it does get on the screen. In terms of the costumes, in terms of the setting, definitely in terms of the color changes.
There's a scene where Cinderella goes running off and she's horribly disappointed. And she's going to go cry out in the garden there just before the godmother comes and transforms her dress. The way it's staged, it's just black with one color and a shadow as Cinderella is running. And it's done so simply and exquisitely.
The scene where Cinderella is set upon by the stepsisters and her dress is torn, that background, it changes and reflects the emotional, hostile quality. It turns into this red, but it doesn't do it straight away. It gradually turns into sort of jungle red.
Girls, girls. That's quite enough.
That, I'm pretty sure, was influenced by Mary Blair's emotional use of color.
I think Mary Blair, somehow when I look at her paintings, kind of identified with the character of Cinderella as this sole character who had to go it alone. You have to remember at the studio at that time, it was very, very rare in the 40s and 50s for a woman to be put in a truly key position at the studio as an artist.
It was hard being a woman artist at Disney. It was hard being a mother in the 50s who had a career, a successful career. She really was living in another age as far as a woman artist.
She was a very shy person, but you didn't push it. because she would stand up for herself. You could learn a lot about how to be kind to other people and still stand up for yourself.
Mary Blair left the Disney studio in '53, just when Peter Pan came out. There was no animosity regarding her leaving. She loved working for Walt and he loved having her there. But she wanted to try other fields like children's book illustration and stuff, and she wanted to be with her children. So she left and she did illustrations and advertisements, very busy. And then one day in 1963, Walt said, I want Mary Blair to do the settings for this little boat that goes through all the countries of the world.
And yes, Walt Disney asked her to come and design the look of the Small World ride that we written the song for.
It's the Small World, and that's the name of our latest attraction at Disneyland. Its stars are the children of the world. Every land from A to Z, from Asia to Zululand is represented.
Walt Disney's secretary called me on the phone and asked if I would like to do the costumes for Small World. And I said, would I? It was far beyond anything I'd ever dreamt could happen in my life, and still is one of the best things that ever happened. I learned so much from her, and we had a lot of laughs and such together, too.
And it was like her coming home, in a way, and she just loved working on the project.
I want you to meet Mary Blair. Mary, this is Julie Reams.
Hello, Julie.
Will you tell her what you're doing here, Mary?
We start this way, making a preliminary sketch.
All of these marvelous drawings and concepts came pouring out of her. And you see all of them if you take the boat ride at Disneyland or Walt Disney World. There it is, it's three-dimensional Mary Blair.
The whole idea of the ride is it's taking you around the world, right? It's really representing all these different cultures. And she's doing that with these blocks of color. Sometimes very, very abstract references to architecture or design motifs from around the world. And it's pretty stunning.
And I know that we felt, all of us that worked on this thing, tremendously happy that the public really dug it. They really went for it. And I think Mary felt that. I think all the people that worked on this wonderful, wonderful project felt the same way. We felt very completed.
I think probably like Walt Disney, she never lost that connection from childhood to adulthood. She never forgot who she was. She never forgot who children were or the nature, the spirit of children.
I met the Blairs when I was a teenager growing up in Santa Cruz. I read a particular article and I decided to look them up in the phone book and call them up, and they answered the phone. And so I had a meeting with them at a local restaurant, and both Lee and Mary were really good at encouraging young talent. I'm always going back to see that fresh, direct approach, and I just find a lot of inspiration from that.
Mary Blair is one of the top 3 requests that comes into the library. Artists are so inspired by her. They will just ask to come and see boxes of Mary Blair.
I'm working on another film now, and we've got a bunch of Mary Blair's artwork pinned up on the wall. There's something about her artwork that really inspires you and makes you just want to go do it yourself, you know, create.
Well, isn't that really the great test of a great artist? You know, if you can do some work decades and decades previously that still resonates with all the things that change in time, that you can look back on an artist and in this day and age, with all the technology we have, that this one woman's work can still be so extremely, unbelievably influential. Isn't that an amazing thing? Isn't that what we all wish, really?